Aloha, George Krischke with Honolulu HI. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the standard deposits with a purchase contract. In Hawaii, it is customary to have three deposits. It's the initial earnest money deposit, the additional deposit, and then there's a final deposit just before the transaction closes. The initial earnest money deposit is customarily between as little as $1,000 and sometimes maybe about 5% of the offer price. And the check that the buyer writes is not going to go actually to the seller. It will be held in the buyer's agent's file until escrow is opened, and then deposited with escrow. So initial deposit maybe $1,000 to $5,000. Then the additional deposit becomes due usually within just maybe 2 business days after the home inspection contingency expires. That is in the purchase contract, that is paragraph J1, the home inspection contingency. And that time period for the home inspection contingency is usually between 10 and 15 days. So 15 days plus 2 business days after that, the additional deposit goes into escrow. And that deposit could be anywhere between as little as $2,000 and as much as maybe 15% of the purchase price. And then there's a final deposit that gets deposited with escrow just before recordation, so that would be at the end of the transaction, and that will make up the difference between whatever is not financed and the total purchase price amount. Now, with brand new projects, with like high-rise construction, condominium buildings, we have quite a few here. The deposit schedule is a little different. It's quite often there's 4 deposits. There might be an initial deposit at time of signing of the contract. That is, quite often it's 5% of the purchase price. Then there is a second deposit that's due within 30 days after the buyer receives the final public report, which is a set of documents that explains the project in detail. So that's the second deposit within 30 days after the buyer receives the final public report, and that's usually quite often another 5%. Then quite often there's a third deposit that's due when the building is maybe 50% completed, and that's usually another 5%. And then at the time the project is finished, which could be sometimes 2 years after the buyer signs the contract. So when the building is finished and when the building gets turned over to the buyer, then the final deposit is due, which is the difference. Now, what actually happens with those deposits during that time frame? It's held by escrow. Now, Hawaii is an escrow state, so those deposits will be applied towards the buyer's down payment, and they will be held by the escrow company, which is an independent third party, and they act as the safekeeper of the funds. The amounts for the resale purchase contract that I mentioned, like $1,000 or $2,000 or 5%, so those are just guidelines. So they do vary, but that's a good guideline to think about. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Aloha.